Another overtime thriller in the Stanley Cup Finals in crucial game number 4. We talk about all that right now on Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL. We are available 7 days a week, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. Together, we are here to discuss all the goals, saves, big moments, and storylines from the night in the Stanley Cup Finals. And we were excited to see what Game 4 would have to offer between the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers after a not-so-great Game 3. Games 1 and 2 were classics. Game 3 went off the rails a bit. So how would the Oilers respond after an ugly loss in Game number 4? Shu, what were you thinking about how the Oilers might respond in this game?
Well, let me first start off by saying that I thought that the start of the game was going to be a lot more better than how we saw Game 3 unfold, but no. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And the reality is the fact that this Game 4, we talked about how Game number 1 and 2 are classics. Game 4, for a lot of reasons, was an absolute classic, and I can't wait to get in it with you right now. Let's go.
Well, we also were wondering how would Stuart Skinner rebound in a game that he was pulled in Game 3. We were told he's Mr. Game 4. I saw a graphic that was shared amongst the crew on Locked On NHL Game Night. Stuart Skinner in his career in Game 4 in the playoffs, 6-0, a 1.26 goals against average, and a .955 save percentage with 2 shutouts. So Mr. Game 4 is kind of a funny nickname because you want to be Mr. Game 7. Mr. Game 4, it just doesn't have the same ring. However, the stats would tell you that Stuart Skinner was ready to bounce back in this one. Couple of lineup changes for the Oilers as well. Troy Stecher was in on defense for John Klingberg, and Jeff Skinner was in at forward for Victor Arvidsson. And things did not start well for the Edmonton Oilers as they would be down 3-0 after the first period. Matthew Tkachuk making an appearance with 2 goals, his first 2 of the finals, both on the power play. Remember all the penalties that Edmonton had in Game number 3. It was continuing at least in the first period in Game number 4. Anton Lundell then would score with 42 seconds left in the period. It's 3-0 Panthers. The crowd's going crazy, and a lot of people were like, I wonder what else is on TV right now.
Listen, I was one of those people. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it, nor am I going to pretend. If you follow me on Twitter at Shukri Wrights, you would absolutely see that I absolutely was at that point where, this series is over. 3-0, and you're basically getting ran out the building in the first period, in which that, listen, if we're going to be completely honest with ourselves, if you just watch that first period alone, what did you really have left to believe that the Oilers were capable of at any given point making any real sort of run or turning things around, considering how things went in Game number 3? Because people like to play this revisionist history like, oh well, like I never really doubted them or whatnot. Like, stop. After how they looked in Game 3, there was plenty of reason why to now have the seed of doubt. You get your doors blown off in Game number 3, 6-1, and then you're down 3-0 after the first period. And now, all of a sudden, in a first period in which let's face it, it was the Matthew Tkachuk show in that first period for the Florida Panthers, where he came out absolutely guns blazing with 2 power play goals. Make no mistake about it. Florida looked like Florida in that first period, and of course, Anton Lundell, who made it a 3-0, which was off of just a bad play by the Edmonton Oilers. But Eddie, hockey is the one sport where you really can say that you just never know how things can absolutely change in an absolute flash. And if there was a singular moment in these Stanley Cup Finals that we're all going to look back on in terms of how the series may swing either way for either the Florida Panthers or the Oilers, look no further than period number 2 of game number 4.
And so much for Mr. Game 4. He was out after the first period. Stuart Skinner pulled, and in came backup Calvin Pickard. And the second period was completely different. And don't forget, so far in the series, the Panthers had owned all the second periods coming into game 4. But this time, it was all Oilers. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins scored a huge goal early on the power play to get Edmonton on the board. Darnell Nurse would score on a nice shot into the top part of the net to make it 3-2. And then Vasily Podkolzin scores to tie it up. And suddenly, after 2, we're tied 3-3. Florida scored 3 goals in the first. Edmonton scores 3 in the second. It's an even game now going into the third.
And you know what's crazy, Eddie? I'm watching the game and I'm saying to myself, if Edmonton could just get one, maybe that would just be enough of a crack in the armor in order for the Oilers to get going offensively. And holy smokes, did they ever. That power play goal that Ryan Nugent-Hopkins scored to make it 3-1, my thought process at that moment was, okay, now you're back in it. You're down by 2. See what happens here. You score on a man advantage in which the Oilers, listen, they didn't really need to spark confidence-wise to score on a man advantage there, but it was important in terms of planting the seed of doubt, because let me remind y'all of something. Florida had already blew a multi-goal lead in game number 1 in this series already. And you're thinking, it happened once before, but what's the likelihood of it happening again? Nah, no way. But when Darnell Nurse made it 3-2, I'm like, uh-oh. Is this really happening what I think is happening? And then when Vasily Podkolzin scored and tied it up at 3, I'm like, oh, man. Eddie, I don't know about you, but I kept thinking to myself, deja vu all over again, because this is now a trend. This is a trend. The Florida Panthers have now blown multi-goal leads in 2 out of the 4 games in this series. That's not a good trend, especially for the defending Stanley Cup champions or anyone else, but let alone a team that had been going into the finals 31-0 when leading by multiple goals after the first and second periods. In this Stanley Cup Finals, that record has been dented, especially after 2 periods.
Well, on to the third, where the Oilers made it 4 straight goals after an Alexander Barkov turnover in his own end. Jake Wallman with a blast past Sergei Bobrovsky. It's 4-3 Oilers, and that's how it would stay until the final seconds. But with the goalie pulled, Sam Reinhart would score to tie it up at 4-4 with 19.5 seconds left, and we would head to overtime for a third time in this Stanley Cup Final. And we had some wild moments in the overtime. Edmonton had a puck go off the post. There was a mad scramble. Gustav Forsling made a save. And then Sam Bennett for the Panthers had a great chance to end it. Puck goes off the glove of Calvin Pickard and then off the post to save the game. And finally, in the end, Leon Draisaitl scores on a one-handed push shot. It deflects off Panthers defenseman Nico Mikkola and into the net. Oilers complete the comeback 5-4 and even the series at 2-2.
And, I want to go back to that third period because that Jake Wallman goal was just an absolute blast. I mean, my God. That was a blast from the heavens. And at that point, my thought process was Edmonton has got to find a way to continue to be aggressive, keep the foot on the gas in terms of not allowing the Panthers to begin to chip away in terms of creating offensive zone pressure, which they did late in the third period, which led to the Sam Reinhart goal that tied it up at 4 with 20 seconds left in regulation. But, man, when that period ended, the third period ended, we went to overtime. I thought process as I'm thinking about, I was like, you know what? The Panthers, if they could somehow get a pull out or the win here, that would be huge in terms of avoiding what could be potential disaster. But Edmonton had other ideas. And Leon Draisaitl, who, how many times have we seen this throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs? especially in these finals where Leon Draisaitl has come up huge in overtime. This is the second time this series that he's come up huge. And ultimately, why this game was so huge from a historical standpoint, as along with the obvious dramatics, teams to win after trailing by 3 goals in the history of the Stanley Cup Finals, the Edmonton Oilers became the first team to do it since the Carolina Hurricanes back in 2006. And before that, it was the Pittsburgh Penguins in 1992 against the Chicago Blackhawks. And then lastly, the thing that also blew my mind is that the Oilers also became the first team to win on the road, no less, after trailing by 3 goals since the 1919 Montreal Canadiens in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals of that year. Talk about history making right there. My God, what a night.
Yeah, the Canadiens did it against the mighty Seattle Metropolitans back in 1919. Wow. And maybe we shouldn't, in a sense, be surprised the Oilers did this because it was the 8th comeback win this postseason, extending their own NHL record. Although, after what we saw in Game 3, to then go down 3-0 and come back to win, that was a surprise, even with the great comebacks the Oilers have had so far in this postseason. All right, up next, we're going to talk about what this win means for the Oilers. We'll also hear from our host of Locked On Oilers as well. That's next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Then you need to crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep filling fuller longer. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether you're snacking at your desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios is a snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's get into this series and what this win means for the Edmonton Oilers. Again, as I said, I wasn't surprised they came back and won, but under the circumstances, after the meltdown in Game 3, then you fall behind 3-0, that changed my opinion. And I thought the Oilers, they've had a lot of comebacks, but this would be a comeback for the age as well. They get it, and even the series at 2-2. Let's get a check with the host of Locked On Oilers, our guy Nick Zararis, what he thought about this comeback win.
Oilers didn't hear no bell. Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers here after a historic 5-4 overtime come from behind victory by the Edmonton Oilers for the first time in the history of the Stanley Cup Final. A team trailing 3-0 after the first period came back and won the game. Previously, teams had been 32-0 in such situations. Leon Draisaitl sets the record for most overtime game-winning goals in a single postseason with 4. And most importantly, the Edmonton Oilers are tied at 2 games apiece in the Stanley Cup Final. We're going back to Alberta for a best of 3 to take home the best trophy in all of sports. Chris Knobloch, a gutsy roll of the dice after the first period, going to Calvin Pickard after Skinner gave up 3 in the first, and the Oilers slowly but surely rallied their way back into this game. And the Oilers showed both themselves and everyone else that, Game 3 was ugly, got away from them a little bit, but this is still a very serious hockey team and a team that's capable of beating anyone on any given night. Of course, you don't want to have to score 3 straight goals to get back in the game all the time. But the Oilers are about this action. The Oilers are this good. And I don't expect a whole lot of conversation about, are the Panthers in trouble? Are the Panthers going to be rattled from this? Because that's not the nature of that team, and that's not the nature of the media that covers the Panthers. But alas, you got to feel good after a win like that. That's the type of game that makes you proud to be a hockey fan, and especially proud if you're an Oilers fan. For everything you need to know about the Oilers going into that crucial game number 5, be sure to check out Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube.
All right, and thanks to Nick Zararis for that report. He's done a great job all postseason long. We really appreciate that. I will disagree with him slightly. I didn't think it was that big of a roll of the dice for Chris Knobloch to pull Stuart Skinner and put in Calvin Pickard. You're down 3-0. Kind of what do you have to lose at that point? So I was not as surprised by it, or didn't think it was as big of a gamble as maybe Nick did. But Calvin Pickard comes in and absolutely does the job. He stops 22 of 23 shots. I thought probably the biggest save was, and there were a few of them, but Anton Lundell, after a terrible giveaway, was all alone in front of the net, and he stoned him, did Calvin Pickard. That would have made it 4-1 at the time. And I was like, man, that's a huge save right there. And of course, the Oilers are able to come back. But I mean, you got to feel good for Calvin Pickard. This guy is a career journeyman. He's been all over the place. He's played in Europe, has come back. He's 7-0 now in the postseason and 4-0 on the road. If they can come back and win this series and capture the Stanley Cup, I mean, he's going to go down as an absolute legend in Edmonton. And that's a place that's got a lot of legends.
And that includes, by the way, some guy named Grant Fuhrer, who's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. But I actually want to touch on that point there, because there was something about what happened at the end of that first period that really caught my attention. It is including the goalie switch, which actually didn't really surprise me. And the reason why it didn't was because it was not hard to envision a move like that being made, considering that going into game number 4, you had to have known that Stuart Skinner, he was going to be on a short leash. You knew. So if you knew that Stuart Skinner was on a short leash going into game number 4, that he didn't really have much room for error, then him getting pulled after being down 3-0 shouldn't surprise anybody. But I'm not saying that to say that it was Stuart Skinner's fault that the Edmonton Oilers were down 3-0 after the end of the first period, which I don't put that blame on him at all. But I will say this, though. What caught my attention was two things. Number one, how Chris Knobloch handled the goalie change. Because as it turned out, he waited until the 11th hour in order to make that goalie change. And it was like a big difference between how he handled it versus how Peter DeBoer handled it in Dallas with Jake Ottinger. But that's a whole different conversation for another day. But you get my point. And then the other thing that caught my attention was this. I listened to the presser tonight after game 4. And a lot of the conversation as to what caused the comeback or the turnaround in the second period and so forth, as it turned out, it was Corey Perry. It was the Corey Perry speech that he gave during the first intermission that provided that spark in that Edmonton Oilers locker room. And I think there's a lot to be said there between, yes, the heroism of Calvin Pickard, his performance, which will not be forgotten anytime soon. I think he should get the start in game number 5. But then also, Corey Perry knowing when to speak at the right time was exactly what the Oilers needed right then and there, considering that team was in a mental cloud as they prepare to come back out in that second period. And that speech might have actually turned the tide for the Oilers.
Leon Draisaitl may be the strongest player in the NHL. The way he can fend off defenders with his body, just his pure strength, and a one-handed push shot goes into the net. Yeah, he got a little bit fortunate, but he's not a lucky player. This, as Nick mentioned, his 4th overtime game-winning goal this postseason, which is an NHL record, his 2nd of the finals already, which tied the record, and his 10th overtime goal this season, including the regular season. This is a guy who knows how to come up big in the clutch. I will say this, though. Had the Oilers lost this game, I was ready to call out Connor McDavid, because in a crucial game 4, he didn't do much. And you think this is maybe the best player in the world, certainly in the conversation. His talent is without question, but if you're going to be considered an all-time great player, you got to come up big in the big moments. I think he's a little bit fortunate that he's going to have at least 2 more moments to try and get a big moment for him, but he didn't do much at all in this game. So I think if you're the Oilers, you're thinking, we came back from down 3-0 on the road and won an overtime game, and our best player, the best player in the world, didn't even do that much. It's a pretty good sign.
He had a moment which, if he had scored, we'd be talking about that goal for probably the rest of eternity. Because there was a play in this game in which that he literally nearly undressed 3 Florida Panther defenders on his way driving towards the net. And I understand where you're coming from. And yes, the concerning aspect is in terms of the lack of production in this series in terms of goals. Even though we did talk about the fact that he's been putting up points in terms of the assists and so forth. But now, considering the events of tonight and considering what you have gotten in terms of offensive contributions up and down the lineup, whether it was from your D, whether if it was from your other forwards, not your stars primarily, but I think seeing the scoring from all different areas of the lineup for the Oilers is going to bode huge, as this is now a best of 3. It was once a best of 7. Now it's a best of 3. And considering the incredible hockey that we have seen during these Stanley Cup Finals, which right now through the first 4 games, I have no qualms in saying that we are in fact looking at an all-time great Stanley Cup Final. Now, with the series returning back to Edmonton, with the series being tied at 2 games apiece with Game 5 on Saturday night, man, we're going to be in for quite a roller coaster, and it's going to be fun to see how things all shake out.
Definitely a missed opportunity for the defending Stanley Cup champs. We're going to hear from the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, Armando Valez, in just a second. We'll do that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. All right, so it's 2-2 heading back to Edmonton. The Panthers 3-0 after one period. The difference between a 3-1 series lead and 2-2 is obviously enormous.
Yeah.
And the Panthers, if they don't come back to win this series, are obviously going to be thinking about the blown lead in game number 4. Let's get a report and see what our guy Armando Valez, the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, has to say about that difficult loss.
Control of the game in game 4 until...
Can we try?
What is up, guys? Armando Valez here from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, here from Amerant Bank Arena as the Florida Panthers lose to the Edmonton Oilers by final score of 5-4. And it was a tale of 2 periods that flipped on its ugly head. Edmonton commits 3 penalties. The Panthers scored 3 times. And they even chased Stuart Skinner in this one. Calvin Pickard comes in, and then it completely flips from there. Edmonton took control. Panthers took 3 penalties. Edmonton scored three times. Scored 4 unanswered, including the go-ahead goal in the 3rd, thanks to Jake Wallman. Sam Reinhart scored with 20 seconds left to at least force overtime. And the Panthers even controlled play and had their chances to win the game, but it was Leon Draisaitl who came in on the rush and scored through the 5-hole of Sergei Bobrovsky. Now the Panthers have to regroup and find a way to win on the road once again in order to lift Lord Stanley's Cup again. We'll break all this down on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
And thanks to Armando Valez for that report. When you talk about the goalies, Sergei Bobrovsky, when you see 5 goals allowed, you might think maybe not a very good game for him. I didn't think Bob was bad. I thought he made a lot of key saves and a lot of big moments. So I'm not hanging this on him as a bad performance. It was good for the Florida Panthers to see Matthew Tkachuk show up with 2 goals, his first 2 of the series. We saw Sam Bennett have a chance off the glove, off the post. I thought Brad Marchand was pretty quiet for a guy who obviously has been very, very good so far this postseason. But Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers, kind of mentioned it. The Florida Panthers, look, 2 games potentially away from home. The Oilers get home ice back thanks to that win if there's a game 7. But as the defending Stanley Cup champs, this is a very confident group. I'm sure, they're human beings. They're going to think, man, this was a missed opportunity. But I think that they're mentally strong enough with the veteran group they've had that's won a cup before. They've won a game 7 against this team. I'm not saying they aren't feeling like this is a missed opportunity, because it was, but I also don't think they're hitting the panic button. It's like, okay, we didn't want to be in this position, but we are in it, and it's the best of 3. And they're good enough to win 2 out of 3 games. So it's a tough loss, but what I'm trying to say is I think for other teams that maybe haven't been there and done that before, this potentially could be a devastating loss. I don't feel like that's the case for the Florida Panthers with this loss.
I'm a big believer in sports that when you are a defending champion, you oftentimes are defined in your attempt to repeat by certain moments in that process. And the Florida Panthers are no different. Earlier in this episode, I talked about how this is the second game in this series where the Florida Panthers have blown a multi-goal lead and lost in overtime. This is not like the Florida Panthers. I'm going to call it as I see it. The Florida Panthers should not panic, no. But this trend is concerning because coming into this cup final, this was a team that when they had a multi-goal lead, they don't lose. Fact. They did not lose. They were 31-0. And now suddenly it happened again tonight in game 4. You're up 3-1. The entire hockey world is like, you know what? This series is done. I myself included. I put myself out there. It's on Twitter. I thought this series was done. But now, when you talk about what has gone wrong with the Florida Panthers in game number 4, you got to start with the second period in terms of defensively. They got lackadaisical. They got lazy. And in number 2, the thing that bothers me in terms of what the Panthers did wrong in game number 4 that led to their loss, their penalty. Them going to the penalty box did them in. It did them in. And then also, lastly, I felt like their game fluctuated in terms of like a strong first period, bad second period, a much better third period, but then in overtime, you could basically toss up a coin, and it could have fell on either side. But the Panthers, in my opinion, they should not be panicking going into game number 5, but I do believe that this trend of blowing multi-goal leads late in games, it's a bad sign for a team that is attempting to repeat as Stanley Cup champions. And if they, for some reason, don't repeat as champions, they're going to look back at games number 1 and games number 4. Mark my words, my friend.
Well, 3 of the 4 games have been absolute classics. Oilers win games 1 and 4 in overtime. Panthers take game 2 in double overtime. The third game wasn't very good. That one got out of hand, but 3 out of 4 ain't bad. I don't know if that was a song that somebody once sang, but it's been a very exciting and eventful Stanley Cup final so far, and we're assured of having at least 2 more games. I think we're all rooting for 3 and see the Panthers and Oilers decided in a game 7. Once again, it is now a best of 3 for Lord Stanley's Cup, and looking forward to talking about what we think about game number 5 coming up on our next show. I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.